Mike Rutenberg just became the Cleveland Browns' new defensive coordinator, and within hours of being officially introduced, he said something so explosive, so unexpected, and so brutally honest that every coach, player, and executive across the entire NFL stopped what they were doing and took notice. This wasn't the standard new coordinator press conference where someone talks about being excited for the opportunity, respecting the talent in the building, and looking forward to working with the players. Rutenberg walked into that room, looked directly at the cameras, and delivered a statement that called out everyone who's failed this defense before him, named specific schemes and approaches that he's throwing in the trash immediately, and made promises about what Cleveland's defense is going to become that sounded more like a declaration of war against every offense in the AFC than a typical introductory press conference. And then he did something that no coordinator in recent memory has done on their first day. He addressed the Ronnie Hickman situation directly, emotionally, and with a level of raw honesty that left reporters speechless and players watching the live stream texting each other in shock. What Rutenberg said about Hickman, about the gambling investigation, about how this team is going to respond to having one of their own targeted and attacked, it's already being called the most powerful statement any Cleveland Browns coach has made in over a decade. And the reaction from Myles Garrett, which sources are now revealing, proves that Rutenberg has already earned the respect of the most important player on this roster without coaching a single snap. The press conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning in the main media room at the Cleveland Browns training facility in Berea. Reporters arrived early, which almost never happens for Browns press conferences anymore, because the fan base and media have been so beaten down by years of dysfunction that even significant announcements get treated with skepticism and exhaustion. But something about this one felt different. Word had been spreading since the night before that Rutenberg's introductory statement was going to be unlike anything the Browns had done before, that he'd specifically asked to address the media without restrictions on what he could discuss, and that he'd told the team's public relations staff he wasn't going to read from a prepared script or take questions through a filter. He wanted a real press conference, the kind where he stands in front of people, says what he actually thinks, and answers whatever they want to ask. That request alone, that insistence on transparency in an organization famous for its carefully managed messaging and corporate speak, told reporters something significant about who Mike Rutenberg is and how he plans to operate in Cleveland. When Rutenberg walks into the room, the first thing that strikes everyone present is his demeanor. He's not nervous, which is remarkable for someone being introduced as a coordinator for the first time in front of a national media contingent. But he's also not performing confidence. He's genuinely calm, genuinely focused, like someone who's been preparing for this moment for a long time and knows exactly what he wants to say and why. He sits down at the table, adjusts the microphone, looks around the room at the reporters assembled, and begins without any introduction from team officials, without any opening remarks from Andrew Berry, without the usual formal structure of these events. He just starts talking, and what comes out is extraordinary. "I've been coaching defense in this league for over a decade," Rutenberg begins. "I've worked for some great organizations and some not-so-great ones. I've been in rooms where coaches talked about players like assets and liabilities instead of human beings. I've seen defensive schemes installed that made no sense for the personnel available because the coordinator was more committed to his system than to his players. I've watched talent get wasted because nobody took the time to understand what a specific player needed to reach his potential. And I've come to Cleveland because I believe this is a place where right now, at this specific moment in time, there's an opportunity to do something different, something real, something that actually works, and I'm going to tell you exactly what that means." The room is already hanging on every word, and Rutenberg hasn't even gotten to the controversial part yet. He continues by talking about the Cleveland Browns defense specifically, referencing the talent on the roster and the system that's been in place. And here's where he gets pointed in a way that new coordinators almost never are in introductory settings. Rutenberg says, "When I watched film on this defense, I saw some things that excited me and some things that frustrated me.
The things that excited me are obvious. Myles Garrett is the best defensive player in football. This secondary has athletes who haven't been used correctly. This front seven has pieces that haven't been assembled in the right way. The frustrating part was watching talented players running schemes that made no sense for the personnel available because the coordinator was more committed to his system than to his players. Asking fast players to play slow, asking instinctive players to think instead of react, asking guys built to attack to sit back and wait. That ends now. Everything we do defensively in 2026 is going to be built around letting our best players do what they do best, at full speed, with complete confidence against every offense we face. Several reporters are already filing notes because what Rutenberg is describing is a direct criticism of how the defense has been run, and he hasn't even mentioned Jim Schwartz in name. But the message is clear. The previous defensive approach didn't maximize the personnel, and Rutenberg is committed to changing that fundamentally rather than tweaking around the edges. Rutenberg then shifts to talking about scheme philosophy, and the specifics he provides reveals someone who's thought deeply about how to get maximum performance from the specific players on this roster, and he names them by name in ways that are surprising and powerful. Rutenberg talks about what he sees in Myles Garrett that hasn't been fully exploited, describing specific rush techniques and alignment variations that he believes will make Myles Garrett even more unstoppable than he's been in his record-breaking seasons. He talks about the cornerbacks on the roster and the specific coverage concepts he's bringing that will allow them to play aggressive man coverage rather than the more conservative zone concepts that have sometimes left Cleveland defense vulnerable. And then he talks about Ronnie Hickman, and that's where everything in the room changes. The energy shifts, the casual note-taking stops, every reporter leans forward, and several cameras zoom in, because everyone knows that mentioning Hickman in this context, with everything happening around the investigation and the attack, is going to be significant. Rutenberg pauses before he talks about Hickman, and the pause itself feels intentional, like he's choosing his words with great care, because what he's about to say matters deeply to him. Then he says, "I want to talk about Ronnie Hickman, because I think how we respond to what happened to him is going to define this team more than any scheme we install or any draft pick we make this offseason. Ronnie was targeted. He was hunted. Someone decided that they had the right to harm him, to send him to a hospital, to try to intimidate him, intimidate us, intimidate this entire organization. And I want to be very clear about something. It didn't work. It's not going to work. This team is not going to be intimidated by criminals or by whatever forces think they can reach into our world and affect what we do on that football field."
The room is completely silent. This is extraordinary territory for a first-day press conference, and Rutenberg isn't finished. He continues, "What I know about Ronnie Hickman from every conversation I've had with people who know him, from every piece of film I've watched of him, from the phone call I had with him yesterday, is that he's exactly the kind of player and the kind of man that you want in your building and in your locker room. He's tough, he's smart, he's coachable, he cares about his teammates, and whoever did this to him made a mistake, because they took a young man who was already motivated and excellent and determined, and they made him more determined. They gave him something to come back for that's bigger than any regular season game or playoff spot. He's coming back to prove that what happened to him doesn't define him, and this entire defense is going to be playing for him when he's not on that field." Several reporters have stopped typing entirely at this point because they're so focused on what Rutenberg is saying. He then addresses the investigation directly in a way that surprises people because it ventures into territory that the Browns organization has been carefully avoiding publicly. Rutenberg says, "I'm not going to pretend that what happened to Ronnie exists in a vacuum, or that it has nothing to do with the world that surrounds professional football. There are forces, financial forces, criminal forces, that see the NFL as an opportunity, as a marketplace where they can make money in ways that have nothing to do with the legitimate business of football. And sometimes those forces try to reach into our world in ways that affect our players. That's a reality we have to acknowledge and confront rather than pretend doesn't exist. I don't know all the details of the investigation. Law enforcement is handling that, and I trust them to do their job. What I know is that my job is to protect my players on the field and to create an environment where they feel safe and supported off it. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that every player in this locker room knows that their DC has their back, not just on 3rd and long, but in every aspect of their life as a professional athlete. That statement about the forces surrounding professional football is going to be heavily discussed and dissected in the hours and days to come, because it's the most direct acknowledgement from anyone in the Browns organization that the Hickman attack may be connected to something systemic rather than being an isolated incident. Rutenberg is essentially saying what law enforcement sources have been telling reporters privately, that there are organized criminal interests with connections to illegal sports gambling that see the NFL as a potential target or leverage points, and that this reality needs to be confronted openly rather than swept under the rug. After addressing Hickman, Rutenberg takes a breath and shifts back to football. But even the football portion of his statement carries the same intensity and directness that's characterized everything before it. He talks about accountability, saying that every player in his defensive unit is going to be held to a consistent standard and that there will be no favorites, no untouchables, no players who escape criticism because of their contract size or their reputation. He says this explicitly in a way that could be interpreted as a reference to the culture of previous defensive units where veteran players were insulated from accountability because of their status. Rutenberg makes clear that in his system, performance determines playing time, full stop, regardless of what someone was paid or what they did in previous seasons. He says this isn't about punishing anyone, but about creating an environment where every player knows exactly what's expected and exactly how their performance will be evaluated, and where the standards are the same for the starter and the backup, for the veteran and the rookie. He also talks about his relationship with Todd Monken and the overall vision they share for how the offense and defense will work together under their leadership. Rutenberg says something that's rarely articulated so clearly in NFL settings, that he and Monken have had extensive conversations about how a defensive scheme can help the offense and vice versa, that they see themselves as building one team rather than two separate units that happen to share a locker room. Rutenberg talks specifically about how a defense that creates turnovers and field position advantages gives the offense opportunities to succeed, and how an offense that controls the ball and scores quickly takes pressure off the defense by keeping it fresh and keeping opposing offenses off the field. This kind of integrated thinking about how the two sides of the ball work together is sophisticated and suggests a level of collaboration between Rutenberg and Monken that goes beyond what typically exists between coordinators and head coaches. The questions from reporters after Rutenberg's opening statement are aggressive and probing in ways that reflect how unusual this press conference has already been. One reporter asks Rutenberg directly whether he's concerned that being so publicly outspoken about the Hickman investigation and about the forces surrounding professional football might put him at odds with the league office or with other teams who prefer these matters to be handled quietly. Rutenberg's answer is characteristically direct. He says, "I'm not in this profession to be comfortable. I'm in it to win and to do right by the people in my care. If saying true things that need to be said makes someone uncomfortable, then those people need to examine why they're uncomfortable with the truth." Another reporter asks about Myles Garrett and whether Rutenberg is confident he can build a system that keeps Garrett invested in Cleveland, given his recent public expressions of frustration with the organization. Rutenberg says Myles Garrett is going to have the best years of his already remarkable career in Cleveland. I've talked to him, I know what he needs, and I'm going to give it to him. Not because I'm trying to keep him happy, but because what he needs is what every great player needs, which is a coach who respects his intelligence, understands his ability, and creates opportunities for him to be at his absolute best every single week. And then comes the final question that generates the biggest response of the entire press conference. A reporter asks Rutenberg what success looks like for him in Cleveland. How will he know if he's achieved what he came here to do? And Rutenberg's answer is so specific and so bold that it immediately becomes the headline of every story filed about this press conference. He says, "Success looks like a Super Bowl. I didn't come to Cleveland to make the playoffs or to have a respectable defense or to be competitive. I came to win a championship. And I believe with the talent we have on this defense, with Myles Garrett leading it, with Ronnie Hickman coming back stronger than ever, with the pieces we're going to add in the draft and free agency, that we can build something here that's good enough to win it all. Not in 5 years, not in some vague future time frame. I'm talking about competing for a championship in 2026 and 2027. That's the standard. And if I don't meet that standard, then you can hold me accountable for saying it right here. That statement, that specific declaration that the goal is a championship in the immediate future rather than a gradual rebuild, is going to define how Rutenberg is evaluated in Cleveland. He set an impossibly high bar on his first day and done it intentionally because he understands that the Browns' culture of mediocrity and low expectations is itself one of the problems he has to overcome, and that the only way to change a culture of losing is to refuse, loudly and publicly, to accept anything less than winning. As of right now, sources say Myles Garrett watched the entire press conference live and immediately texted multiple teammates and people close to him with messages expressing genuine excitement and belief in Rutenberg that he hasn't felt about a defensive coordinator in years. Garrett reportedly told one source, "This is the guy. This is what we've been waiting for." Those words from Garrett are more valuable than anything Rutenberg said in that press conference, because if the best player on the defense believes in his new coordinator, everything else becomes possible.